The Olympics are underway after a rather subdued opening. Television ratings are down and the host nation Japan is taking a financial hit from the absence of spectators. But the Tokyo Games are still managing to produce some big winners. Well, for more, let's bring in Seijiro Takeshita in Shizuoka, Japan. He's a professor of management and information at the University of Shizuoka. Thank you so much for joining us, Seijiro. Firstly, thank you for staying up so late where you are right now. But firstly, tell us, what is the mood like in Japan right now? We did see protests in the lead up to the Games over concerns that perhaps the Olympics might worsen the coronavirus situation in Tokyo. What's public support like now?
Well, as you just noted, there's a very heavy amount of anxiety amongst the public that, this event would actually accelerate the spread of COVID-19. We're facing one of the biggest wave of COVID-19, especially with the new variant type. So people have been quite worried. But as you just noted, as the game started, people's concentration now is up to the games and who wins gold medal, etc. Unfortunately, we weren't able to show our omotenashi, which is our concept of welcoming people from overseas, which people were very much geared up to because, especially after the great success of 2019 Rugby World Cup, the Japanese were really willing to show their welcoming, attitude. But unfortunately, as you just reported, there's no spectators from overseas. And for that reason, I think it's a bit of a different type of legacy building that we're going through right now.
Now, we had several Japanese companies decline to send representatives to the opening ceremony, including Toyota, Fujitsu, and NEC. To add to that, Toyota and Bridgestone were two companies that are refusing to air commercials during these Olympics. Can you explain to us why would Japanese companies be looking to distance themselves from these games?
I would say that they probably considered the general public's opinion atmosphere. Uh, it depends on the poll that you look at, but approximately 70 to 80% of the Japanese public are, well, I wouldn't say against, but are hesitant about, having this Olympic. For that reason, I think the general public's mood has definitely switched away from a positive mode into rather a negative mode. And I think some of the companies, I think it's a good thing that, many of the companies have the freedom, basically, away from the so-called instructions of the government or municipal government and have their freedom to basically abide by, what they feel is quite right.
Now, one of the major draw cards for an Olympics host city is the fact that you'd get tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tourists flooding the city in a normal year. Obviously, that's not the case with these games. So where does the Japanese economy stand to benefit from hosting the Tokyo Games?
Well, the actual income, 70% is secured by the televised rights. So obviously, the fact that we have no spectators isn't as bad as it sounds. But that said, as you just pointed out, the peripheral, benefits, for example, like the tourism and also legacy building for many people that would come to Japan who would probably return back, those things aren't going to happen. So it's going to be quite negative for those industry. But again, we must realize that this is a totally different Olympics, and although many people are expecting that this was going to be similar to 1964 Tokyo Olympics in the sense that we showed to the world that we're out of the doldrum. In other words, in 64, it was out from the World War II. This time, out from the very big tragedy of 2011 tsunami, and show the world that we're probably getting out of the decade or 2 decades of what we call the lost decade to start anew. But unfortunately, as you pointed out, that's not going to be the case. So it's probably going to be a new legacy building. For example, being able to host Olympics in spite of this coronavirus is probably going to be the new legacy that will be built in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, Professor Seijiro Takeshita, we will have to leave it there, but thank you again for staying up late and joining us on the program.